Mafia boss held her bloody hands under the rain after finding out she betrayed him for love. The fluorescent lights of the trauma wing at Greybridge General Hospital hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to vibrate right against Elena Ward's skull. It was 3 a.m, and the air smelled of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of dried blood. Elena rubbed the back of her neck, trying to massage away the tension that had knotted there over the last 12 hours. She was 32 years old, but tonight she felt ancient. She had spent the last hour sitting with a young mother whose son had been caught in the crossfire of a drive-by shooting 3 blocks away. The boy would live, but the look in the mother's eyes, that hollow, terrified exhaustion, was something Elena could not fix with breathing exercises or grief counseling. It was the look of Greybridge itself. Elena gathered her coat and purse, stepping out of the staff room. The hospital was quieter now, the chaos of the Friday night rush finally settling into the uneasy silence of the early morning. She walked through the corridors, her heels clicking softly against the linoleum. Most people in her line of work eventually grew numb to the violence, building walls to keep the horror at bay. Elena had tried that, but the mortar never held. Every time she saw a family shattered by a robbery or a gang dispute, she was right back in her childhood living room, 16 years old, watching the police cover her father's body with a white sheet. That memory was the engine that drove her, the reason she had become a trauma counselor. She had a desperate, pathological need to fix broken people, perhaps because she had never quite managed to fix herself. The main exit was locked for security, so she headed for the side door that led to the physician's parking lot. It was a shortcut, cutting through a narrow service alley that ran behind the hospital kitchens. Usually, it was safe enough, just dark and smelling faintly of refuse, but tonight the city felt heavy. The fog had rolled in off the river, thick and damp, clinging to the brick walls. Elena pushed the heavy steel door open and stepped into the cool night air. She buttoned her coat, clutching her bag tight against her side. The street lamp at the end of the alley was flickering, casting jerky, spasmodic shadows across the wet pavement. She kept her head down, walking briskly, her keys laced between her fingers, a habit Noah had taught her years ago. She heard the sound before she saw them. It was a wet, stifled cough, followed by the scuff of leather against concrete. Elena stopped. She should have turned around immediately. She should have run back into the safety of the hospital. But the instinct to help, that fatal flaw in her character, made her freeze and look toward the shadows near the dumpster. 3 men stood in a tight circle. 2 of them were large, their silhouettes bulky in dark coats. The 3rd man was on the ground, slumped against the brick wall. He was not moving. A dark pool was spreading slowly beneath him, black as oil in the dim light. One of the standing men turned, sensing her presence. The movement was sharp, predatory. "Hey," he barked, his voice rough. "We got a witness." Elena took a step back, her heart slamming against her ribs. The man reached inside his jacket, his hand closing around something that glinted with dull menace. "No." A voice cut through the darkness. It was not loud, but it carried an authority that froze the air in the alley. The man on the ground was forgotten as a 4th figure stepped out from the deeper shadows. He had been leaning against the wall, observing, but now he moved into the flickering light of the street lamp. He was tall, wearing a tailored black suit that looked out of place among the grime of the alley. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that was severe and striking, dominated by eyes that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Marco Moretti. Elena knew the face. Everyone in Greybridge knew the face, though usually from grainy newspaper photos or whispered warnings. He was the head of the Moretti syndicate, the man who effectively ran the docks and half the city's vice, disguised behind a veil of legitimate shipping businesses. "Stand down," Marco said. His gaze was fixed on Elena. "She is a civilian." The heavy-set man hesitated, his hand still inside his jacket. "Boss, she saw us." "She saw nothing," Marco said, his voice dropping an octave, smooth and dangerous. "Did you, Miss Ward?" Elena stopped breathing. He knew her name. The realization sent a cold spike of fear down her spine, sharper than the winter wind. She looked from the gun in the henchman's jacket to the body on the ground, and then straight into Marco Moretti's eyes. They were dark, intelligent, and terrifyingly calm. "I did not see anything," Elena whispered. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. Marco nodded once. A sharp, precise movement. He walked toward her. The other men tensed, but he waved a hand, dismissing them. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. Up close, he smelled of expensive cologne, rain, and something metallic, like gun oil. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder. The police were coming. "You should not be taking shortcuts at this hour," Marco said. He reached out and took her elbow. His grip was firm, his fingers warm through the wool of her coat. It was a gesture that could have been gentlemanly in another context, but here, with a dead man 10 feet away, it felt like a shackle. "Come. I will walk you to your car. I can walk myself," Elena said, trying to pull her arm back. He did not let go. He did not tighten his grip, but he did not release her. "It is not a request, Elena." He guided her past the scene, positioning his body between her and the carnage, shielding her view. He walked her to her sedan parked under a halo of yellow light. The sirens were close now, blue and red lights flashing against the low clouds. Marco opened her car door. He loomed over her, blocking out the rest of the world. The rain began to fall, a light drizzle that misted his dark hair. "Go home," he said softly. "Forget you took this route. Forget the face on the ground. And if I do not?" Elena asked, the question slipping out before she could check her temper. She had never been good at being intimidated, even when she should be. Marco looked at her then. Really looked at her. A flicker of something passed through his eyes. Amusement? Respect? It was gone too fast to be sure. "I know where you work." "Elena," he said. The threat was elegant, wrapped in velvet. "We do a lot of charitable work for Graybridge General. It would be a shame if the hospital lost its funding because of a misunderstanding." He leaned in closer, invading her personal space until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Drive safe," he murmured. He stepped back and closed the door. Elena locked it instantly, her hands shaking so badly she fumbled with the ignition key 3 times before the engine roared to life. As she pulled out of the lot, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The alley was empty. Marco Moretti and his men were gone, vanishing like ghosts into the fog. The apartment was warm, smelling of garlic and roasted chicken. It was a sanctuary, a world away from the cold alley. But Elena could not stop shivering. She locked the deadbolt in the chain. Leaning her forehead against the wood for a long moment to compose herself. "Elena?" She jumped. Noah was sitting at the small kitchen island, a law book open in front of him. Her younger brother looked tired. His shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. At 28, he still had the boyish smile that allowed him to charm his way out of anything. But tonight his expression was serious. "You are late," Noah said, glancing at the clock on the stove. "It is nearly 4. You said you would be home by 2. Elena hung her coat on the rack, keeping her back to him as she focused on breathing evenly. "We had a trauma case come in late. Paperwork. You know how it is." She walked to the sink and turned on the tap, scrubbing her hands with soap and hot water. She scrubbed hard, as if she could wash away the feeling of Marco's hand on her elbow. Noah watched her. He was perceptive, annoyingly so. She believed he worked in financial crimes, chasing paper trails and tax evaders for a federal task force. It was safe, boring work. Exactly what she wanted for him. "You are shaking," Noah noted. "Low blood sugar." Elena lied smoothly. She dried her hands on a towel and finally turned to face him. "Why are you still up, waiting for you?" Noah said. He closed his book. "Graybridge is getting worse. I do not like you walking to your car alone at night. I am fine. Noah, I can take care of myself." She walked over and kissed the top of his head, a gesture of affection she had done since he was a toddler. But as she pulled away, the image of Marco Moretti's dark eyes flashed in her mind, overlaid with the blood pooling on the wet concrete. She felt like a liar. She was harboring a secret that could get them both killed, and she had only had it for an hour. "Go to bed." "Noah," she said softly. The next morning, the hospital administration office called Elena before she'd even finished her first cup of coffee. Dr. Reynolds, the chief of staff, was a nervous man who always looked like he was waiting for a lawsuit to drop. When Elena entered his office, he was pacing. "Elena, good morning. Sit down, he said, gesturing to a chair. "Is something wrong?" Elena asked. "Did I fill out the intake forms incorrectly for the collision victim?" No, nothing like that." Reynolds stopped pacing and leaned against his desk. "We have a unique opportunity, a partnership. A very wealthy local foundation is launching a mental health initiative for their private security firms. High-stress jobs, potential PTSD. They want a dedicated trauma counselor." Elena frowned. "I work for the public hospital. Dr. Reynolds, my patients are indigent. They cannot afford private care. That is the beauty of it," Reynolds said, beaming. "The foundation is offering a massive grant to the hospital. New MRI machines, a renovated pediatric wing, all in exchange for 2 afternoons of your time a week at their private clinic." "Who is the donor?" Elena asked, though a cold knot was already forming in her stomach. "The Moretti Charitable Foundation," Reynolds said. The room seemed to tilt. Elena gripped the armrests of her chair. "I cannot do it," she said. "Elena, please," Reynolds said, his smile faltering. "This funding saves jobs. It saves lives. They specifically requested you. They said your reputation for discretion and empathy is unmatched. Specifically requested her." Marco was pulling the strings. He was showing her exactly how easily he could reach into her life, how he could manipulate her career and her moral compass with a single check. If she refused, the hospital lost the money. If she refused, she insulted a man who ordered executions in alleys. "Fine," Elena said, her voice hollow. "When do I start?" The clinic was located in the Uptown District, a sleek building of glass and steel that looked nothing like the crumbling brick of General Hospital. The interior was muted tones of beige and cream, soft jazz playing in the background. It smelled of lilies, not bleach. A receptionist led Elena to a private lounge on the top floor. "Miss Ward, Mr. Moretti will be with you in a moment." Elena stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city skyline. From up here, Graybridge looked clean, peaceful. You looked different without the rain. Elena spun around. Marco Moretti stood in the doorway. He was wearing a gray suit today, the fabric hugging his broad shoulders. He looked rested, calm, and utterly in control. "Mr. Moretti," Elena said stiffly. "Please, call me Marco." He walked into the room, moving with that same predatory grace she had seen in the alley. "Thank you for agreeing to help us. My employees. They see difficult things. They need someone they can trust." Elena clutched her file folder against her chest like a shield. "Is that what this is? Or are you just making sure I keep my mouth shut?" Marco smiled. It was a small, dry curve of his lips. It did not reach his eyes. "You are direct. I like that." He gestured to the leather sofas. "Please, sit." Elena sat on the edge of the cushion, her back straight. Marco took the chair opposite her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, invading her space without moving his feet. "I meant what I said last night," Marco said softly. "I value discretion, but I also did my research. You are the best trauma counselor in the city. My men respect strength, but they are broken. You fix broken things, do you not?" "I try to help people heal themselves," Elena corrected. He watched her, his gaze dropping to her mouth for a fraction of a second before returning to her eyes. It was a subtle look, heavy with an intent she could not quite decipher. It made her skin prickle, a flush rising on her neck that she prayed he did not notice. "Tell me, Elena," he said, his voice dropping to a conversational murmur. "Who fixes you?" Elena blinked, thrown off balance. "That is not relevant to our professional arrangement." "Everything is relevant," Marco said. He reached out and took the file folder from her hands. His fingers brushed hers, a deliberate, lingering contact that sent a jolt of electricity straight up her arm. She snatched her hand back as if burned. Marco opened the file, pretending to read, but she knew he was watching her reaction. "You have a younger brother, Noah. You raised him after your father died. A robbery, was it not?" He was digging. He was peeling back her layers while giving her nothing of himself. "My personal life is off limits," Elena said sharply. Marco looked up. His eyes were dark pools, unreadable and deep. Boundaries, good. "You will need them here." He stood up, closing the file. "My head of security will coordinate the schedule. Welcome to the family. Elena." He walked out, leaving her sitting in the silent, expensive room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt cornered, and worse, beneath the fear, there was a treacherous spark of fascination. He was a monster. She knew that. But he was a monster who looked at her as if she were the only puzzle he wanted to solve. That evening, dinner with Noah was a tense affair. Elena pushed her pasta around her plate, her appetite gone. "I have news," Noah said. He poured himself a glass of water, his face grim. "Good news?" Elena asked hopefully. "Different news," Noah said. "I have been reassigned. The task force is shifting focus. I am moving to the organized crime division." Elena froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Organized crime?" "Noah, that is dangerous. Why would they move you?" "Because I am good at what I do," Noah said. "We are targeting the big fish, the guys who think they own this city." He leaned across the table, his voice dropping. "We are going after the Moretti family." The name hung in the air between them. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She set her fork down carefully, terrified that if she moved too fast, she would shatter. "Moretti?" she repeated, her voice sounding thin and foreign to her own ears. "Yeah, Marco Moretti," Noah said with disdain. "He's the worst of them. Brutal, untouchable. But we are going to bring him down." He looked at Elena, his expression softening into concern. "That is why I need you to be careful. Graybridge is going to get messy. Stay away from the bad neighborhoods. Stay away from anything that feels even remotely criminal." "I will," Elena whispered. She was lying again. She was not just close to the criminal element, she was on its payroll. She was sitting in plush offices with the very man her brother was hunting. Noah went back to eating, oblivious to the chasm that had just opened up beneath their feet. Elena watched him, a terrible weight settling in her chest. She was trapped. If she told Noah about the clinic, he would make her quit, and Marco might retaliate against Noah. If she stayed silent, she was betraying her brother every single day. Later that night, Elena could not sleep. The rain had returned, drumming a steady, mournful rhythm against the glass of her bedroom window. She stood there in the dark, wrapping her robe tighter around herself, looking out at the sprawling lights of Graybridge, somewhere out there, in a penthouse high above the grime. Marco Moretti was likely awake, too. She wondered if he was thinking about his men, or the police, or the war that was coming. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. She should be terrified. She should be planning her resignation, packing her bags, running as far away as she could. But when she closed her eyes, she did not see the gun or the body in the alley. She saw Marco's hand reaching for hers. She felt the ghost of his touch on her elbow. He saw her. In a world where she spent all her energy observing others, absorbing their pain, making herself invisible to facilitate their healing. Marco Moretti had looked at her and seen her. It was a dangerous, seductive thought. It was the kind of thought that got people killed. Elena stepped away from the window, but she knew it was already too late. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean, but it could not wash away the feeling that she had just stepped off a ledge and was already falling. The sessions at the Uptown Clinic had become a ritual that Elena Ward viewed with a mixture of professional fascination and growing personal dread. Over the past month, her role had expanded beyond individual consultations into weekly group therapy for what the Moretti Charitable Foundation euphemistically called security staff. Elena sat in a circle of high-backed leather chairs, holding a notepad she rarely looked at. The men around her were large, their knuckles scarred and their eyes guarded. They spoke of stress, of sleepless nights, and of the hypervigilance that came from living in a city that wanted to eat them alive. But what struck Elena most was not their trauma, but their loyalty. Mr. Moretti paid for my daughter's surgery, one man said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He did not have to. I was just a driver then. But he saw the bills on the dash of the car and took care of it. Another man nodded, leaning forward with elbows on his knees. He gave me a job when I came out of prison. No one hires an ex-con in Graybridge. Mr. Moretti said the past is dead if you bury it deep enough. Elena listened, her pen hovering over the paper. She had expected fear. She had expected a hierarchy built on brutality, the kind of terrified obedience she saw in the eyes of gang members brought into the emergency room. Instead, she found a fierce, quiet devotion. Marco Moretti did not just rule these men, he anchored them. He provided structure in a chaotic world, buying their loyalty with protection and favors that the law could never offer. It made him dangerous in a way she had not anticipated. A tyrant who was loved was far harder to dismantle than one who was hated. When the session ended, the men filed out with polite nods, leaving the room feeling strangely empty. Elena gathered her things, glancing at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 7 in the evening. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sky had turned a bruised purple, heavy with unshed rain. She walked out to the lobby, expecting to call a cab, but Marco was there. He stood near the reception desk, reading a document on a tablet. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him with military precision, and when he looked up, the intensity of his focus made the air in the room feel thin. My driver is off tonight, Marco said, sliding the tablet into his briefcase. I will take you home. Elena tightened her grip on her purse strap. That is not necessary. I can catch a taxi. It is raining. Elena, Marco said simply, gesturing toward the glass doors. As if on cue, the heavens opened. It was not a gradual start. It was a sudden, torrential downpour that hammered against the glass, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon and gray. The streets of Graybridge flooded quickly, the drainage systems old and clogged with debris. Please, Marco said. His voice was low, devoid of the command he used with his men, yet it carried a weight she found difficult to refuse. Allow me. The drive was quiet at first. The luxury sedan was a cocoon of silence, insulating them from the drumming rain and the honking horns of the gridlocked traffic. The leather seats smelled of cedar and something uniquely masculine that Elena now associated entirely with him. She watched the windshield wipers slice back and forth, mesmerizing in their rhythm. You have a way with them, Marco said, breaking the silence. His eyes were on the road, his hands relaxed on the steering wheel. My men. They do not trust easily. They are human. Marco, Elena replied, turning slightly to look at his profile. They are carrying heavy things. Gratitude can be just as heavy as guilt. Marco's jaw tightened. Is that what you think they feel? Gratitude? I think they feel indebted, Elena said carefully, and I think you rely on that debt to keep them close. He glanced at her then, a flash of something dark crossing his face. Loyalty is the only currency that does not devalue in this city. You think I bought them? Perhaps, but I also keep them alive. And who keeps you alive? Elena asked. The question hung in the air, intimate and sharp. Marco looked back at the road, his expression unreadable. I do not have the luxury of needing someone to keep me alive, he said quietly. I have made my choices. Regret is a ghost I learned to live with a long time ago. There was a vulnerability in his tone that surprised her. It was a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man beneath the myth. I see regret every day at the hospital, Elena confessed, her voice softening. I see victims who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I see families destroyed because someone wanted a wallet or a watch. Sometimes I feel completely helpless. I spend my days trying to stitch people back together, but I know I am just sending them back out into the same meat grinder. Marco slowed the car as the traffic thinned near the outskirts of the city. He did not look at her, but she felt his attention shifting, centering entirely on her. You are not helpless. Elena, he said, you are the only person I have met who actually tries to stop the bleeding instead of just watching it happen. He turned the car onto a side road that wound up toward the cliffs overlooking the river. It was not the way to her apartment. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, her heart rate picking up. "Just a moment," Marco said. "You asked who keeps me alive. Sometimes you just need to breathe." He pulled the car into a small, gravel overlook. Below them, the city of Graybridge sprawled out like a circuit board of glittering lights, softened by the relentless rain. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting a pool of yellow light that fought against the darkness. Marco turned off the engine. The silence that rushed in was filled only with the sound of rain on the roof. "What do you do?" "Elena," he asked, turning in his seat to face her. "To feel alive, after you have absorbed all that pain from your patients, after you have carried the weight of your father's memory? What is yours?" Elena felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She looked down at her hands. "I do not have much time for hobbies." "That is a lie," Marco said gently. "Tell me." She hesitated, looking into his dark eyes. They were searching her face, not with the predatory assessment she had feared at their first meeting, but with a genuine, hungry curiosity. "I used to dance," she whispered, "before my father died. Ballet. Contemporary. I loved the discipline of it." The way the world narrowed down to just movement and breath. Marco held her gaze for a long moment. Then, without a word, he opened his door. "Marco?" Elena called out as he stepped into the rain. He walked around the hood of the car, the water soaking his suit jacket instantly. He opened her door and extended a hand. "Come," he said. "Are you insane? It is pouring. Come," he repeated. Elena looked at his hand, then at his face. Rainwater dripped from his dark hair, running down his sharp cheekbones. He looked wild and elegant all at once, against every instinct of self-preservation, against every rule of logic. She took his hand. He pulled her out of the car and into the downpour. The cold was shocking, stealing the breath from her lungs, but Marco's hand was hot. He did not let go. He led her under the flickering street lamp, where the light caught the falling droplets like suspended diamonds. "There is no music," Elena said, shivering, though she was not sure if it was from the cold or the proximity of him. Marco stepped closer, eliminating the space between them. He took her other hand and placed it on his shoulder. Then, his hand slid around her waist, his palm settling at the small of her back. The heat of his touch seared through her damp blouse. "We do not need music," Marco murmured. He began to move, a slow, subtle sway. Elena followed him instinctively, her body remembering the language of movement even after years of stillness. They moved in a small circle on the wet gravel, the rain plastering their clothes to their skin. Elena looked up at him. His eyes were locked on hers, intense and unguarded. She could feel the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm on his chest. It was a heavy, powerful rhythm, proof of life in a man who dealt so frequently in death. His hand at her back pressed lightly, guiding her closer until their bodies were almost flush. The smell of rain and expensive cologne was overwhelming. The city below them disappeared. The hospital disappeared. Noah and the task force disappeared. There was only this circle of yellow light, and the man holding her as if she were something precious and breakable. "Elena," Marco whispered, his voice rough. His gaze dropped to her lips. His hand moved up her spine, his fingers spreading across her shoulder blades, pulling her in. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could feel his warm breath ghosting across her wet skin. Her breath hitched, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She wanted this. God help her. She wanted this. She wanted to bridge the gap, to taste the danger and the sorrow that lived in him. But the reality of who he was and who she was crashed back in. Elena pulled back sharply, her hands pressing against his chest to create distance. "I cannot," she gasped, her voice trembling. Marco froze. He did not try to pull her back, but he did not step away. He stayed there, hovering on the edge of the moment. "I am your therapist, Marco," Elena said, the words sounding flimsy and bureaucratic in the rain-swept night. "This is a violation of everything." Marco stared at her. the rain running down his face like tears he would never shed. A small, pained smile touched his lips. It was the saddest thing she had ever seen. I never pretended to need saving. Elena, he said softly. He stepped back, releasing her. The loss of his warmth was immediate and physically painful, but you, he continued, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. You make me want something clean, something I do not deserve. The word clean hung between them, heavy with implication. He saw her as redemption, and he saw himself as stain. Get in the car, Marco said, his voice returning to its usual controlled cadence. You will catch a cold. Dinner that night was a blur. Elena sat across from Noah in their small kitchen, her hair still damp from the shower she had taken to scrub the feeling of the rain off her skin. She felt raw, exposed, as if her nerves were on the outside of her body. Noah was talking about his new assignment, his voice animated with the thrill of the chase. We have a lead on the supply chain, Noah said, stabbing a piece of broccoli with his fork. The Moretti Syndicate moves product through shell companies, construction materials, mostly, but we are close to cracking the ledger. Elena gripped her fork so tight her knuckles turned white. She stared at her plate, the pasta looking like a tangle of worms. Who is the target exactly, she asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. You mentioned a name before. Marco Moretti, Noah said, the name sounding like a curse in his mouth. He's smart. He keeps his hands clean, lets his lieutenants do the dirty work. But we are going to nail him. He's a cancer on this city. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. You make me want something clean. Marco's words echoed in her mind, overlapping with Noah's condemnation. Are you okay? Noah asked, pausing. You look pale. I am fine, Elena said quickly. Just a long day. The rain gave me a headache. She stood up abruptly, taking her plate to the sink. Tell me about your partner. Is he nice? She changed the subject with the desperation of a drowning woman, terrified that if Noah looked too closely at her, he would see the shadow of Marco Moretti stamped on her soul. For 3 days, Elena avoided the clinic. She called in sick on Tuesday. On Thursday, she sent an email canceling the group session, citing a conflict at the hospital. She told herself she was doing the right thing. She was creating distance. She was reestablishing the boundaries she had allowed to dissolve in the rain, but you could not ghost a man who owned half the city. On Friday afternoon, Elena was at the nurses' station at Graybridge General, reviewing a chart, when a hush fell over the corridor. It was the kind of silence that usually accompanied a celebrity or a disaster. She looked up. Marco Moretti was walking down the hallway. He looked impeccable in a navy suit, flanked by 2 hospital administrators who were practically tripping over themselves to please him. He carried a large envelope in one hand. He nodded politely to a nurse who looked like she might faint, his charm switched on to full wattage. Elena felt a spike of panic. What was he doing here? Miss Ward. Doctor, Reynolds called out, spotting her. Come here, please. Elena walked forward, her legs feeling like lead. She stopped 5 feet away, clutching her clipboard to her chest. Mr. Moretti has just delivered the 2nd installment of the grant check personally, Reynolds gushed, waving a hand toward Marco. And he wanted to say hello to our star counselor. Marco looked at her. His face was a polite mask, but his eyes were blazing with a suppressed intensity. Miss Ward, Marco said smoothly. I was concerned when you canceled the session this week. I hope you are feeling better. I am fine, Elena said, her voice tight. Just busy. The hospital needs me. Of course, Marco said. The work you do here is vital. He turned to Reynolds. Doctor, might I borrow Miss Ward for a moment? I have some specific questions regarding the trauma protocols for my staff. Of course. Take all the time you need, Reynolds said, beaming. Marco gestured down the hall. Elena, stiff-backed, walked with him. They passed the elevators and the waiting room, turning the corner toward the emergency exit stairwell. The moment the heavy fire door clicked shut behind them, the polite facade vanished. The stairwell was concrete and cold, echoing with the distant hum of the hospital's generator. Why are you avoiding me? Marco asked. His voice was low, hurt, and devoid of the charm he had displayed in the hallway. Elena spun around to face him. "You cannot just show up here. Marco, this is my job. This is my life, and I am part of your life now, whether you like it or not," Marco said, stepping closer. "I canceled the session because we crossed a line," Elena said, her voice rising. "At the Overlook. That should not have happened. I cannot treat you or your men if we are what?" Marco demanded. He stepped into her space. Elena backed up until her shoulders hit the concrete wall. Marco did not stop until he was looming over her. He raised his hand, bracing it against the wall just above her head, boxing her in. He did not touch her, but his presence was overwhelming. "I'm trying to protect us both," Elena whispered, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. "From what?" Marco asked softly. His eyes searched hers, desperate and intense. "Do you think I would ever let anything happen to you? It is not about safety, Marco. It is about right and wrong. It is about the fact that my brother—" She cut herself off, biting her lip. She had almost said it. She had almost told him about Noah. Marco's eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not press. Instead, his expression softened into something agonizingly open. "I do not care about right and wrong," he said, his voice raspy. "I care that you have not looked at me for 3 days. You have become the only person in this entire city whose opinion can actually wound me. Do you understand that?" Elena looked up at him. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the cracks in the stone. He was a violent man, a criminal, a kingpin. But in this fluorescent-lit stairwell, he was just a man begging to be seen. The heat of his body radiated toward her. She could smell the rain on his coat. Even though it was dry outside today, Marco, she breathed. She did not know who moved first. Perhaps it was gravity. Perhaps it was inevitable. Elena lifted her face. Marco made a low sound in his throat and dipped his head. Their lips met. It was tentative at first, a question asked and answered in the soft press of mouths. But then the dam broke. Weeks of tension, of stolen glances, of fear and fascination, shattered in an instant. Elena gasped, opening to him, and the kiss turned desperate. Marco groaned against her mouth. His hand left the wall and cradled her jaw, his thumb brushing fiercely over her cheekbone, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. His other hand slammed flat against the small of her back, anchoring her, pulling her body flush against his. She felt the hard lines of him, the power he held in check, now unleashed in a torrent of passion. She gripped the lapels of his suit, pulling him closer, needing to feel him, to understand the reality of him. It was a kiss that tasted of danger and longing, a kiss that burned down every boundary she had carefully constructed. For a moment, there was no hospital, no Mafia, no task force. There was only the friction of their lips, the heat of his hands, and the desperate, terrifying realization that she was falling in love with the enemy. They broke apart, gasping for air. Marco rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing ragged. Elena trembled in his arms, her lips swollen and tingling. "We are in trouble," Marco whispered, his voice wrecked. Elena opened her eyes, looking at the man she was supposed to fix. The man her brother was sworn to destroy. "I know," she whispered back. She knew then that nothing would be simple after this. The line had been crossed, erased, and forgotten. They were standing on the edge of a precipice, and they had just jumped. The elevator to Marco's penthouse moved in silence, a smooth, vertical glide that separated Elena Ward from the grit of Graybridge below. Every time the doors slid open to reveal the sprawling expanse of marble and glass, Elena felt as though she were stepping into a different dimension. This was their sanctuary, a world suspended in the sky where the sirens were muffled and the war on the streets felt like a distant nightmare. Their relationship had become a series of stolen hours. It was a fragile thing, built in the shadows and fueled by a desperation neither of them dared to voice aloud. Elena stepped into the living room, kicking off her heels. Marco was already there, standing on the balcony with a glass of red wine in his hand, looking out at the skyline. He turned as she entered, the hard lines of his face softening instantly. It was a transformation that never failed to make her heart stutter. the way the ruthless architect of the city's underworld became simply a man the moment he saw her. "You look tired," Marco said, sliding the glass door open to let her join him. "It was a long week," Elena admitted, taking the glass he offered. They stood side by side, the wind whipping at Elena's hair. Below them, the city was a grid of amber and white lights, beautiful only from this distance. They did not talk about the shootings reported on the evening news or the fresh trauma cases in Elena's ward. Instead, they talked about the things that had been stolen from them by time and circumstance. Elena spoke of her childhood before the robbery, of weekends spent at the lake house her father had built. Marco, in turn, offered rare, guarded glimpses of a boy who had wanted to be an architect before the weight of his family name crushed that dream into dust. Later, they moved to the oversized velvet couch, the room lit only by the glow of the city outside. Marco sat in the corner, and Elena curled up beside him, tucking her legs beneath her. He pulled a cashmere blanket over them, his arm encircling her shoulders, pulling her into the solid warmth of his side. It was quiet, a heavy, comfortable silence. Marco's hand rested on her forearm, his thumb lazily tracing circles on her skin. The motion was hypnotic, a repetitive caress that soothed the frayed edges of her nerves. "Marco," Elena whispered, breaking the silence, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if things were different?" Marco's hand stilled for a moment before resuming its rhythm. "If things were different, if you were not—" "This," she said, gesturing vaguely to the penthouse, "the luxury and the invisible weight that came with it. If I had met you in a coffee shop, if you were just Marco—" He let out a short, humorless laugh, but his grip on her tightened slightly. "I think about it every time I look at you," he confessed, his voice growing hoarse. He turned his head, resting his cheek against the top of her hair. "In that life, I imagine waking up in a house with a yard," he murmured, the words vibrating against her. "I imagine going to work, coming home with sawdust on my hands instead of blood, and seeing you there. No bodyguards, no armored cars, just a normal man coming home to the woman he loves." The vulnerability in his voice tore at Elena's heart. She shifted, turning her body so she could look at him. His eyes were dark, filled with a longing so profound it looked like pain. "It sounds beautiful," she whispered. "It sounds impossible," Marco replied. He leaned down, and she met him halfway. The kiss was slow, tasting of wine and sorrow. It was a lingering exploration, his lips moving over hers with a tenderness that belied the violence of his world. Elena felt her pulse race, a drumbeat echoing in her ears as the carefully constructed composure Marco wore like armor began to crack. He shifted, pulling her closer until she was practically in his lap. His hands began to roam, no longer lazy but reverent. His fingertips skimmed down the length of her spine, tracing the vertebrae through the thin fabric of her blouse, making her shiver. His palms splayed protectively at her lower back, holding her against him as if he were afraid she might vanish if he let go. Elena threaded her fingers through his thick, dark hair, the texture soft against her skin. She responded with breathless urgency, her body arching into his touch. There was a hunger in the way they moved together, a desperate need to be close, to erase the space between them. She wanted him. She wanted to forget the morality, the laws, the danger, and just exist in this feeling of being desired by him. Marco's hand moved to her waist, his thumb brushing the skin beneath the hem of her shirt. His kisses deepened, trailing down her jawline to the sensitive pulse point at her neck. Elena gasped, her head falling back, her hands gripping his shoulders, but as his hand moved higher, brushing the side of her breast, the reality of who he was crashed into the fantasy. She saw the flash of the gun in the alley. She saw the bruises on the men in her therapy sessions. Elena stiffened. Marco stopped instantly. He froze, his face buried in the curve of her neck, his breathing heavy and ragged. Elena pulled back, creating a few inches of space between them. Her face was flushed, her lips swollen, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of desire and fear. She pressed her forehead against his, closing her eyes. "I cannot," she whispered, her voice trembling. Marco did not pull away. He did not get angry. He simply stayed there, his forehead resting against hers, waiting. "I am not ready," Elena confessed, the words hurting her throat. "I want you, Marco. God, I want you, but I cannot surrender completely. Not yet. Not while you still order the things you order." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Elena braced herself for rejection, for the cold withdrawal of the crime boss who was used to taking what he wanted. Instead, Marco let out a long, shuddering breath. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. There was desire there, burning hot and bright, but there was also patience. He took her hand, lifting it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, one by one, his gaze never leaving her face. "I told you, Elena," he murmured, his voice rough with restraint. "I will never ask for more than you can give." He turned her hand over, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I will wait," he promised. "I will wait until you feel safe, even if it takes a lifetime." His restraint, so at odds with his reputation, deepened the ache in her chest. It made her trust him more, which only made the looming reality of her brother's investigation more terrifying. The duality of Elena's life began to fracture her. By day, she walked the sterile halls of Graybridge General or the hushed corridors of the Moretti Clinic. By night, she lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, while Noah sat in the kitchen, turning their apartment into a war room. Noah's investigation had intensified. He had stopped hiding the nature of his work, perhaps because he needed someone to talk to, or perhaps because he was too exhausted to filter his words. He unknowingly shared details that made Elena's blood run cold. "We have surveillance on the warehouses in the industrial district," Noah said one evening over takeout, pointing a chopstick at a map he had spread out on the table. "We know they are moving the shipment on Thursday. We cracked the code they use for the delivery times." Elena chewed her food mechanically, tasting nothing. Thursday. Marco had told her he had a late business meeting on Thursday. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice tight. "Positive," Noah said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "We are tightening the noose, every meeting, every drop-off. We are building a file that will bury the Moretti family for good." Elena felt a wave of nausea. Every time she was with Marco, she wondered if a long-range lens was capturing the moment. She wondered if her own face was sitting in a manila folder on her brother's desk, labeled as an associate. She realized with dawning horror that the federal task force was not just watching the crime, they were watching the man she loved, and the walls were closing in fast. To make matters worse, the streets were becoming unstable. A rival syndicate, the Valdez crew, had begun to push aggressively into Moretti territory. They were younger, more reckless, and significantly more violent. Marco began to arrive at their stolen evenings looking worn. One night, he came to the penthouse with his right hand wrapped in a bandage. When Elena unwrapped it to check the wound, she found his knuckles bruised and split, the skin raw and purple. "What happened?" she asked softly, dabbing antiseptic on the cuts. Marco hissed through his teeth but did not pull away. A disagreement. "The Valdez crew hit one of our distribution centers. They hurt 2 of my men. Did you hurt them back?" Elena asked, dreading the answer. Marco looked at her, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "I did what was necessary to ensure they do not return." He looked so tired, the weight of the crown pressing down on him. Elena finished bandaging his hand and reached up to cup his face. His stubble grazed her palms. "Come back alive, Marco," she whispered, the plea slipping out before she could stop it. "Just, please come back alive." Marco closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "For you, Elena. Only for you." The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Elena had stopped by the temporary offices of the task force to bring Noah a change of clothes. He had been pulling double shifts and sleeping on a cot. The office was a chaotic bullpen of ringing phones and shouting agents. She found Noah's desk empty, but she heard his voice coming from the break room around the corner. She moved to join him, but stopped dead when she heard another voice, deep, authoritative, and angry. It was Agent Miller, Noah's team leader. "We need a lever," Miller was saying. "We cannot just wait for them to slip up. We need to force a mistake. We have an informant inside the mid-level circle. Noah replied, his voice low. It is not enough, Miller snapped. We need to rattle the cage. If we cannot get to Moretti directly, we squeeze the people around him. We find the family members of his lieutenants. We lean on them. We threaten to expose their secrets, their finances. We make them turn. But that puts civilians in the crossfire, Noah argued. This is war. Ward, Miller said coldly. There are no civilians in a war. There is only collateral damage. Elena backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned and walked out of the station, her hands shaking so badly she dropped her keys in the parking lot. Collateral damage. That was all she was to them. That was all anyone was. Later that night, Noah came home looking pale. He sat on the couch, staring at the television without turning it on. Noah? Elena asked. Sitting beside him. They threatened me, he said quietly. Who? I do not know. Anonymous call. They knew where I worked. They knew about you. L. They said if I did not back off, accidents happen. Elena felt the room spin. The Valdez crew? Or Marco? She could not imagine Marco threatening Noah, but Marco did not know Noah was her brother. To Marco, Noah was just a federal agent trying to destroy his life. I have to go deeper, Noah said, rubbing his face with his hands. I convinced Miller to let me try a specialized undercover op. I can get inside. I can end this before anyone gets hurt. No, Noah, Elena pleaded, grabbing his arm. It is too dangerous. Please, just walk away. Transfer to a different unit. I cannot, Noah said, looking at her with a terrifying resolve. This is my job, Elena, and now it is personal. Elena went to her room and locked the door, sliding down to the floor as a panic attack seized her chest. She gasped for air, her lungs feeling like they were filled with concrete. She was torn apart. Her brother and her lover were on a collision course, speeding toward each other like two freight trains in the dark, and she was tied to the tracks between them. She called Marco late that night, needing to hear his voice. Elena? He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp with alertness. What is wrong? I just had a bad dream. She lied, curling into a ball on her bed. Marco was silent for a moment. He knew her too well now. He could hear the tremor in her breath, the hysteria she was barely holding back. You are hiding something. Elena, he said softly. I can feel it. I am just scared. Marco? The city? Everything feels like it is exploding. I will protect you, he vowed. I promise you. But who would protect him, and who would protect Noah? The terror became a constant companion. Elena stopped eating. She startled at loud noises. She watched Noah pack a bag for his undercover assignment, looking so young and fragile despite the badge he carried, and she knew she had to do something. She could not just sit and watch them destroy each other. She made a choice that felt like tearing her own soul in half. The next time she was at Marco's penthouse, she did not just drink wine and gaze at the stars. She listened. Marco was on the phone in the study, the door slightly ajar. Elena stood in the hallway, pressing herself against the wall, her heart beating so loud she was sure he could hear it. Tuesday night, Marco was saying, his voice low and steely. The warehouse by the old cannery. 11 o'clock. Make sure the perimeter is secure. Valdez will be looking for an opening. Elena closed her eyes, burning the information into her brain. Tuesday, 11, old cannery. She told herself she would never use it. She told herself it was just a failsafe. If the Valdez crew attacked, if Noah was in danger, if things went wrong, she would have something to trade. She would have leverage. She walked back into the living room as Marco hung up and emerged from the study. He looked at her, his expression softening as he crossed the room to take her in his arms. I am sorry, he murmured into her hair. Business. It is okay, Elena whispered, hugging him back fiercely. She breathed in his scent, cedar, rain, and safety, and felt like the greatest traitor who had ever lived. She was gathering ammunition against the man she loved to save the brother who was hunting him. She was playing a game she did not know how to win, and she knew, with a sickening certainty, that no matter what happened, she was going to lose everything. The shockwave hit Graybridge General Hospital not as a sound, but as a shudder that ran through the foundation of the building. In the trauma wing, the lights flickered, casting the hallway into momentary grayness before buzzing back to life. Elena Ward froze, a file folder halfway to the counter, her heart skipping a beat. Seconds later, the red emergency phone on the wall began to scream. The next 2 hours were a blur of controlled chaos that tested every ounce of Elena's professional detachment. A bomb had detonated at a distribution warehouse in the industrial district, a property owned by a shell company linked to the Moretti family. The blast had torn through the corrugated steel walls during a shift change, spilling fire and debris onto the street where civilians were walking to the bus stop. Elena stood in the center of the triage bay, her hands trembling as she directed nurses to the counseling overflow rooms. The air smelled of singed hair, diesel fuel, and the metallic copper tang of blood. "Miss Ward," a nurse called out, voice cracking. "Bed 4. He's asking for you." Elena rushed over, pulling back the curtain. Lying on the gurney, his face half-bandaged and his arm in a sling, was Marcus, a 19-year-old boy she had counseled in her community outreach program just last week. He was not a gang member. He was a stock boy at a grocery store 2 blocks from the warehouse, simply walking home. "Elena?" Marcus croaked, his good eye wide with shock. "The ground. It just exploded. I thought I was dead." Elena gripped his uninjured hand, smoothing his soot-stained hair back from his forehead. "You are safe. Marcus, you are at the hospital. You are going to be fine." But as she looked at the burns on his arm and the terror etched into his young face, the comfort she offered felt like ash in her mouth. This was not a random tragedy. This was war. And the man she had allowed into her heart, the man whose bed she had nearly shared, was the general of one of the armies. Fury was a cold, clarifying thing. It burned away the fear and the hesitation that had plagued Elena for weeks. She left the hospital before her shift ended, something she never did, and drove straight to the Moretti Charitable Foundation headquarters. She did not wait for the receptionist to announce her. She walked past the security desk, her heels striking the marble floor like hammer blows, and took the private elevator to the top floor. Marco's office was a fortress of glass and mahogany, silent and imposing. When Elena threw the heavy double doors open, Marco was standing behind his desk, speaking in rapid, low Italian into a phone. He looked up, his eyes widening in surprise, but before he could speak, Elena crossed the room and slammed her palm down on the polished wood of his desk. "Hang up," she ordered. Marco murmured a quick command into the receiver and set it down. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and there were dark circles bruising the skin beneath his eyes. "Elena," he started, moving to come around the desk. "Do not come near me," she snapped, backing away. Marco froze, his hands raising slightly in a gesture of surrender. "Elena, I know what happened. I know you are upset." "Upset?" Elena laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. "My patient is lying in a burn unit. Marco, a 19-year-old boy who has never held a gun in his life. 4 people are dead. Smoke is still rising over the city. This is what you do. This is the order you bring." Marco's face hardened, the exhaustion replaced by a cold, defensive mask. "I did not plant that bomb. Elena, that was the Valdez crew. They attacked my property. They killed my men. And you will hit back, won't you?" Elena accused, tears stinging her eyes. "You will send your soldiers to blow up something of theirs, and more people will get caught in the middle. It is a cycle. Marco, it is a meat grinder, and you are turning the handle. I am trying to stop it," Marco roared, his composure finally cracking. He slammed his fist onto the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Do you think I want this? Do you think I want my city burning? I'm trying to hold the line against animals who have no code, no honor, then walk away," Elena screamed back. "If you hate it, leave it. Dismantle it." Marco let out a bitter, hollow laugh. He walked toward her, shaking his head. "Walk away? You think it is that simple? You think I can just hand in a resignation letter and retire to the countryside? Yes, if you wanted to. You would find a way. There is no way out." "Elena," Marco shouted, closing the distance between them. "There is only survival or death. If I leave, the Valdez crew takes everything. They burn this city to the ground. I am the dam holding back the flood." He was close now, looming over her, radiating heat and anger. Elena did not back down. She shoved his shoulder with both hands, channeling all her fear and frustration into the blow. "I hate you for this," she sobbed, shoving him again. "I hate that you make me part of this." Marco caught her wrists. It was not a violent grip, but an anchor. He held her hands against his chest, stopping her assault, forcing her to feel the frantic rhythm of his heart beneath the silk of his shirt. "Elena, stop," he breathed, his voice breaking. She looked up at him, her vision blurred by tears. She saw the despair in his eyes, the trap he was in, the monster he had to be to keep the other monsters at bay. And beneath it all, she saw the man who had held her in the rain. The anger did not vanish, but it transmuted into something else, something raw and desperate. Elena stopped fighting his grip and collapsed forward, her forehead hitting his chest. Marco released her wrists and immediately wrapped his arms around her, crushing her against him. "It is not fair," Elena whispered into his shirt. "I know," Marco rasped, burying his face in her hair. "I know." He pulled back just enough to look at her. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and the air between them charged with a sudden, electric intensity. This was not the gentle romance of the balcony. This was two survivors clinging to driftwood in a hurricane. Marco kissed her. It was fierce and breathless, a collision of grief and desire. Elena gripped the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to feel his solidity to keep from drowning in the chaos of her life. Marco's hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, his kiss devouring her panic and replacing it with fire. They broke apart only when their lungs burned for air. They stood there in the silent office, foreheads pressed together, both breathing hard. "You are the only thing that feels real," Marco admitted in a low voice, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "You are the only person who can make me question everything I am." Elena squeezed her eyes shut, her heart aching. "I am terrified. Marco, I am terrified of losing you. I am terrified of losing my brother. I am trapped between two speeding trains, and I do not know how to get off." Marco pulled her into his arms again, holding her head against his shoulder. He did not ask about her brother. He assumed she meant losing Noah to the violence of the city, not the specific truth of the investigation. "I will not let you fall," he promised, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "I will fix this. I will end this war. Elena, I swear it." But as Elena held him, she knew that his promises were made of smoke. He could not fix this. No one could. When Elena returned to her apartment that night, the lights were off. She fumbled for the switch, her nerves still frayed from the bombing and the confrontation with Marco. When the light flooded the living room, she gasped. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table. He was shirtless, holding a bag of frozen peas to his ribs. A large, dark bruise bloomed across his torso, purple and angry. There was a cut above his eyebrow that had been hastily butterfly bandaged. "Noah!" Elena dropped her keys and rushed to him. "My God, what happened?" Noah hissed in pain as she touched his shoulder. "Close call. L. Too close." He looked up at her, and the fear in his eyes terrified her more than the bruise. Noah was the brave one. He was the one who believed in justice and order. Now, he looked like a frightened boy. "The Valdez deal," he explained, his voice thin. "My cover almost blew. They got suspicious. If the task force had not moved in when they did..." He trailed off, shaking his head. He gripped Elena's hand, his fingers cold. "We are losing. L. The Valdez crew is gaining ground because Moretti is on the defensive, and the Bureau... They are pushing for results. If we do not make a major arrest soon, they are going to pull the plug on the operation. Or worse, escalate to urban warfare tactics." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I need an edge. I need something to cripple the Moretti syndicate so we can sweep them up and focus on Valdez." "Noah, I am just a counselor," Elena whispered, pulling her hand away. "Do not lie to me, Elle," Noah said, his voice desperate. "I know you treat his security team. I know you are in that building. You hear things. People talk when their guard is down." He stood up, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and grabbed her shoulders. "Please, Elena, this is not about snitching. This is about saving lives. If we can intercept a major shipment, we can arrest the leadership. We can take Marco Moretti off the board without a body count. If we do not, more bombs go off. More kids like Marcus end up in the burn unit, or I end up in a morgue." Elena looked at her brother's battered face. She thought of Marcus screaming in the hospital bed. She thought of Marco's bitter laugh when he said there was no escape. If Marco was arrested, he would be alive. He would be in prison, yes, but he would be safe from the Valdez assassins. He would be safe from the war. It was a twisted, naive logic, but in her exhausted, terrified mind, it felt like the only lifeline left. "I heard something," she whispered, the betrayal tasting like bile. Noah froze. "What? What did you hear?" Elena closed her eyes, visualizing the map in her mind, recalling the phone call she had overheard. "Tuesday," she said, her voice trembling. "Tuesday night, 11 o'clock. There is a meeting at the old cannery warehouse by the docks. Marco will be there." Noah exhaled, a sound of pure relief. The cannery. "That is the distribution hub we suspected." "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Elena said, opening her eyes. Noah pulled her into a hug, wincing as his ribs protested. "You just saved me. You just saved this whole city." Elena hugged him back, staring blankly at the wall. She had saved her brother, but she had just signed the warrant for the man she loved. The days leading up to Tuesday moved with the agonizing slowness of a funeral procession. Elena moved through her life like a ghost, waiting for the hammer to fall. On Monday evening, the night before the raid, Marco invited her to the penthouse. She wanted to say no. She wanted to hide in her apartment and vomit until the guilt was gone. But she went. She had to see him one last time before everything changed. When she arrived, the penthouse did not smell of expensive cologne or ozone. It smelled of garlic and basil. Marco was in the kitchen. He had abandoned his suit jacket and tie. His dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the strong, corded muscles of his forearms. He was standing over the stove, stirring a pot of marinara sauce. "You cook?" Elena asked from the doorway, surprised despite her dread. Marco turned, a boyish grin lighting up his face. It was a smile she had never seen before, open, unguarded, free. "My mother's recipe," he said, "though I think I burned the garlic. Do not tell anyone. It would ruin my reputation." Elena felt a fresh wave of heartbreak. He looked so normal, so human. She walked over to him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her face against his back. "It smells perfect," she mumbled. Marco turned in her arms, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked down at her, his expression softening into something reverent. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I wanted tonight to be just us," he said softly. "No business, no war, just dinner." They ate on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below them like a reflection of the stars. Marco told stories about his grandmother, about the summers he spent in Sicily as a child. He laughed, a real, rich sound that vibrated in his chest. After dinner, they stood by the railing. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of impending rain. Marco took off his suit jacket and draped it over Elena's shoulders, wrapping her in his warmth. Elena looked at his profile. He was looking out at the city he ruled, unaware that the wolves were gathering at the gate because she had opened it. "Marco," she started, her voice shaking. He turned to her, his eyes dark and warm. Yes, she wanted to tell him. The words were right there, clawing at her throat. "Run, get out, they know about the cannery." But then she saw Noah's bruised face in her mind. She saw the burn victims. She froze, trapped in the impossible choice. "What would you do?" she stammered, pivoting the question. "What would you do if someone you trusted betrayed you?" The warmth in Marco's eyes did not fade, but a shadow passed behind them. He looked out at the horizon, considering the question seriously. "Betrayal is the only death that truly matters," he said quietly. "A bullet just kills the body. Betrayal kills the soul." He looked back at her. "If it were anyone else, I would destroy them, That is the rule. And if it were someone you loved? Elena whispered. Marco stepped closer, pulling the lapels of the jacket tighter around her. He looked down at her with a terrifying intensity. Then I would have to choose, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Between my heart and my survival. Elena's stomach dropped as if the balcony floor had vanished. He knew. Surely, he knew. But then he kissed her forehead, lingering there. But I do not have to worry about that with you, Elena. You are the only truth I have left. Tuesday night was a suffocating blanket of darkness. The air was heavy, charged with static. Elena was alone in her apartment. Noah had left hours ago, dressed in tactical gear. His face grim but determined. It is go time. He had texted her at 10:30. Elena paced the length of her small living room. Her phone was clutched in her hand, her knuckles white. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a hammer blow against her sanity. 10:45. She could not do it. She could not let him walk into a trap. Arrest or not, bullets would fly. People would die. She dialed Marco's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Please pick up. Please, Marco, pick up. Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system. Elena let out a sob of frustration. He had turned his phone off. He was already there. He was at the cannery, secure in his belief that the meeting was secret, secure in his trust in her. She tried the clinic number. No answer. She tried the main foundation line. Voicemail. She ran to the window, throwing it open. The city lay spread out before her, dark and indifferent, and then she heard it. In the distance, toward the waterfront, the wail of sirens began, 1, then 2, then a chorus of them, rising and falling like a choir of banshees. Elena sank to her knees, the phone slipping from her fingers. It had started. The raid was happening. I am sorry, she whispered into the empty room, rocking back and forth. I am so sorry. She had tried to save everyone, and in doing so, she had likely damned them all. The sirens grew louder, a screaming testament to her betrayal. As the first drops of rain began to splatter against the window pane, dark and heavy like blood. The rain that had threatened all evening finally broke over the shipping yards of Graybridge, turning the industrial concrete into a slick, shimmering mirror of black oil and neon. At the old cannery warehouse, the silence of the night was not broken by the shout of a federal agent, but by the deafening crack of a sniper rifle. Inside the warehouse perimeter, Marco Moretti had just signaled his men to load the final crate. He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up a split second before the glass of the skylight above them shattered. Take cover, Marco roared, shoving his second-in-command behind a stack of shipping pallets, just as the ground where they had been standing was chewed up by automatic fire. Chaos erupted with the force of a detonated grenade. From the east entrance, federal agents in tactical gear swarmed the gate, their blue strobes cutting through the downpour, screaming for surrender. But from the shadows of the shipping containers to the north, a blind spot that should have been secure, muzzle flashes lit up the night like fireflies. It was not just a raid, it was an execution. The Valdez crew had arrived. Marco drew his weapon, his mind racing as he fired 2 controlled shots toward the north perimeter. The feds were pinned down at the gate, caught in a crossfire they had not anticipated. They had come for an arrest, but they had walked into a war zone. The Valdez gunmen, positioned on the high cranes and behind rusted machinery, were firing indiscriminately at both the Moretti soldiers and the federal agents. "We are surrounded!" One of Marco's men screamed, his voice barely audible over the roar of gunfire and the pounding rain. Marco gritted his teeth, the taste of copper and adrenaline flooding his mouth. This was impossible. The location was a secret. Only 3 people knew the time and place. A bullet grazed his upper arm, tearing through the fabric of his jacket and searing his skin like a branding iron. Marco hissed, stumbling back against the cold steel of a container, clutching the wound. He watched as Dario, a man who had driven him to school when he was a child, took a round to the chest and fell face first into a puddle. "Dario!" Marco shouted, lunging forward, but another volley of bullets forced him back. Grief, sharp and sudden, pierced through his combat instincts, but it was quickly cauterized by a cold, blinding fury. This was not a coincidence. The feds knew exactly when to strike. The Valdez crew knew exactly where to ambush. Someone had sold him out. "Move," Marco ordered the survivors, his voice icy calm amidst the bedlam. "We head for the river. Fall back." The emergency room at Graybridge General was a scene of controlled panic. Stretchers were being wheeled in at a run, the floors slick with water and blood. Elena Ward stood near the intake desk, her hands gripping the counter so hard her knuckles were white. She had seen the news alert on her phone. Shootout at the docks, multiple casualties, officer down, officer down. The words echoed in her skull, a mantra of terror. She scanned every gurney that burst through the double doors, her breath trapped in her lungs. "Elena!" She turned. A paramedic she knew was wheeling a gurney toward Trauma Bay 2. On it lay Noah. Elena let out a choked sound and ran to him. He was conscious, but his face was gray, covered in grime and blood. His tactical vest had been cut away, revealing a dark, soaking bandage pressed against his shoulder and another on his thigh. "Noah!" Elena gasped, grabbing his uninjured hand. "Oh, God. Noah, I am okay," Noah rasped, though his eyes were unfocused and wild with pain. "It is just a through and through on the leg. Shoulder took some shrapnel." Elena walked alongside the gurney as they pushed him into the bay. Doctors swarmed around him, cutting away his pants leg, checking his vitals. Elena stood at the head of the bed, stroking his forehead, her own tears mixing with the rain still clinging to his hair. "What happened?" she whispered, leaning close to his ear. "You said it was just an arrest. You said it would be clean. It was a setup." Noah coughed, wincing as a nurse tightened a tourniquet. "It went sideways. The Valdez crew, they were waiting for us. They were waiting for Moretti. It was a kill box." Elena froze, a cold sensation spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. They knew? "Someone on the inside," Noah murmured, his voice slurring as the pain medication began to take hold. "Someone fed the intel to everyone. To us. To Valdez. They played us all against each other." Elena straightened up, her hand flying to her mouth. She had given Noah the location. She'd been the leak, but she had not told the Valdez crew, which meant she was not the only one betraying Marco. Or worse, her betrayal had been intercepted, used, and weaponized by someone else to turn a surgical strike into a massacre. "I did this," she thought, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "I helped pull the trigger." 2 hours later, Noah was stable and sleeping in a private recovery room on the 4th floor. The hospital had quieted down, the initial rush of the casualties either treated or moved to surgery. Elena sat in the chair beside his bed, staring at the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean of anything resembling hope. She needed to leave. She needed to find Marco. She needed to know if he was alive. She stood up, her legs trembling, and turned toward the door. He was already there. Marco stood in the hallway, just outside the threshold of the room. He was dressed in black dark jeans and a heavy tactical jacket that was torn at the shoulder. He was soaked to the bone, water dripping from the hem of his coat onto the linoleum floor. His face was pale, emphasizing the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the terrifying darkness of his eyes. Elena stopped breathing. Marco looked past her, his gaze landing on Noah's sleeping form. He saw the badge clipped to the side table. He saw the family resemblance in the set of Noah's jaw. Then, he looked at Elena. The silence that stretched between them was louder than the gunfire at the docks. It was the sound of a world ending. "Marco?" Elena whispered, the name falling from her lips like a confession. He did not speak. He did not yell. He simply turned and walked away, his boots making no sound on the floor. Elena hesitated for only a second before she ran after him. "Marco, wait!" He did not stop. He walked with a lethal purpose toward the emergency stairwell at the end of the hall. Elena followed him, pushing through the heavy fire door just as it began to close. The stairwell was concrete and cold, lit by the harsh buzz of fluorescent tubes. It was a vertical tunnel of echoes. Marco descended half a flight of stairs to the landing between floors and stopped. He turned to face her, his back to the railing. "You asked me," he said. His voice was low, shaking with a suppressed tremor that frightened her more than shouting would have. "On the balcony. You asked me what I would do if someone I trusted betrayed me." Elena stood at the top of the stairs, clutching the railing. Tears began to stream down her face, hot and fast. "Marco, please. You knew," he said. It was not a question. "You asked about the warehouse. You asked about the timing. You were so worried. I thought you were worried for me." He took a step toward her, moving up the stairs slowly, like a predator cornering wounded prey. "My men are dead. Elena, Dario is dead because someone told the feds where we would be, and someone told the Valdez crew." "I did not tell Valdez," Elena cried out, the denial tearing from her throat. "I swear to you, Marco, I never spoke to them." "But you spoke to him," Marco said, pointing a shaking finger toward the door that led back to Noah's room. "You spoke to the federal agent in that bed. He's my brother," Elena sobbed. Marco stopped. The revelation seemed to hit him physically. He flinched, his eyes widening slightly before narrowing into slits of pure agony. "Your brother," he repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You are the sister of the man hunting me, and you have been sleeping in my bed." He lunged forward then, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. Elena backed up until her shoulders hit the concrete wall. Marco slammed his palms against the wall on either side of her head, trapping her. He leaned in so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the rain and the gunpowder and the metallic scent of his own blood. "I trusted you," he rasped, his voice cracking. "I told you everything. I told you my fears. I told you about the life I wanted. I let you see me. And the whole time you were gathering intelligence." "No!" Elena shook her head frantically, her hands coming up to grip his forearms, but he flinched away from her touch as if she were acid. "It was not like that. I never wanted to hurt you. I was trying to save him. You destroyed me," Marco roared, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. He dropped his voice to a whisper, trembling with rage. "Was it real? Any of it? Or was I just a case to you, a broken thing to fix? Or worse, just a target?" "It was real," Elena choked out, sliding down the wall slightly as her knees gave way. "I love you, Marco. I love you more than my own safety. I love you more than I should." "Then why?" he demanded, his eyes searching hers, desperate for an answer that could make sense of the knife in his back. "Because he is my family." Elena wept. "Because I thought if you were arrested, you would be safe. I thought if the feds took you, the Valdez crew could not kill you. I was trying to keep you alive." Marco stared at her, his expression crumpled, shifting from rage to a heartbreak so profound it looked like physical pain. He looked at her tear-stained face, her trembling mouth, the woman he had cooked for, the woman he had danced with in the rain. "You naive, foolish woman," he whispered. "You have not saved me. You have started a war." He reached out, his hand cupping her jaw. It was a rough, desperate touch. He ran his thumb over her cheekbone, wiping away a tear, looking at her as if he were trying to memorize her face before it was gone forever. "I should kill you," he said softly. "The code demands it. You are a traitor." Elena looked up at him, seeing the conflict raging behind his eyes. "Do it," she whispered brokenly. "If you have to." Marco let out a shuddering breath. He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers for one brief, agonizing second. Then he pulled away, stepping back as if the gravity between them had suddenly reversed. "I cannot," he said, his voice hollow. He looked at her one last time, his gaze dead and cold. "Do not come to the penthouse. Do not come to the clinic. If I see you again, Elena, I do not know if I can stop myself." He turned and walked down the stairs, his movements stiff and heavy. "I will have eyes on you," he called back without looking at her. "No one will touch you. Not my men, not Valdez. You bought your life with your betrayal. Live with it, Marco?" Elena screamed his name, pushing herself off the wall. He did not look back. The heavy door at the bottom of the stairwell slammed shut, leaving her alone in the buzzing silence. Elena collapsed onto the concrete steps, pulling her knees to her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking back and forth, a guttural sob tearing from her throat. She had tried to be the bridge between two worlds, and instead, she had become the explosive that shattered them both. The days that followed were a blur of gray rain and red headlines. The city of Graybridge did not just burn, it unraveled. The ambush at the docks had broken the stalemate. The Valdez crew, emboldened by their strike, launched a series of aggressive attacks on Moretti territory. Drive-by shootings became nightly occurrences. Businesses under Moretti protection were firebombed. Marco Moretti, the man who had once tried to hold back the chaos, was now a ghost. He was nowhere to be seen, but his wrath was felt everywhere. Retaliation strikes were swift and brutal. Bodies were found in alleys, in cars, in the river. Elena returned to work, but she was a shell of herself. She walked the halls of the hospital like a sleepwalker. Every siren made her jump. Every new trauma patient made her flinch. Noah was recovering at the apartment, on leave while his wounds healed. He spent his days on the phone with his superiors, frustration etched into every line of his face. He did not know the full extent of what Elena had done. He thought she had given him a tip. He did not know she had broken a kingpin's heart to do it. One evening, Elena stood by her living room window, watching the smoke rise from a fire in the garment district, another Moretti stronghold. She pressed her hand to the glass. She could still feel the phantom sensation of Marco's hand on her jaw, the rough warmth of his thumb wiping away her tears. She had wanted to save them. She had wanted to stop the violence. Instead, she had poured gasoline on the fire. Guilt, heavy and suffocating, settled over her shoulders like a lead blanket. She realized then that there was no going back. There was no fixing this with therapy or bandages. She had stepped into the arena, and now she had to finish it. She turned away from the window, her eyes dry and hard. She picked up her phone. She would not let Marco drown in the blood she had helped spill. She would not let Noah die for a war she had escalated. She had one card left to play. It was the most dangerous one of all. But she had nothing left to lose. The decision did not come to Elena Ward in a moment of panic. It came to her in the cold, gray light of dawn. After 3 nights of listening to the sirens tear apart the city she called home, she sat at her kitchen table, watching the steam rise from a mug of coffee she had not touched, and realized that she was the only person left who could stop the bleeding. She had started this war with a whisper. She had to end it with a scream. 2 hours later, she sat in a parked car in the basement garage of the federal building. Next to her was Agent Miller, the man who was currently running her brother's task force. He looked skeptical, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of deception. "You are asking for a lot, Miss Ward," Miller said, his voice flat. "You want immunity for yourself? That is doable. You are a civilian who got in over her head, but you want a deal for Marco Moretti? The man is the head of a crime syndicate. He's the only thing standing between this city and the Valdez crew," Elena said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "You know the Valdez file. They are butchers. They target families. They burn down neighborhoods just to send a message. Marco operates on a code," Miller scoffed. "A code. They are all criminals. Elena, if you take Marco out, Valdez takes over," Elena pressed, "and the body count triples. But if you offer Marco a way out, if you offer him a path to cooperate, he can give you the Valdez operation on a silver platter. He knows their supply lines. He knows their safe houses. And why would he do that?" Miller asked. "Why would a kingpin turn informant?" "Because he has nothing left to lose," Elena whispered, "except me." The plan was terrifying in its simplicity. Elena would broker a meeting. She would wear a wire to ensure the safety of the agents and to record the intel. But the primary goal was not an ambush. It was a negotiation. Miller agreed, reluctantly. But the condition was clear. If Marco showed up with an army, or if the situation went sideways, the tactical team would open fire. The penthouse felt different this time. The air was stale, stripped of the warmth and the scent of basil that had filled it just days ago. When Elena stepped off the elevator, she saw dust sheets draped over the furniture like shrouds. Boxes were stacked near the door. Marco was leaving. He was preparing to vanish. She knocked on the heavy oak door. There was no answer for a long time. She knocked again, louder. Finally, the lock clicked. The door swung open. Marco stood there. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. His face was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over his cheekbones. His eyes were red-rimmed and dull, stripped of the fire that usually defined him. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, looking less like a Mafia boss and more like a man at the end of his rope. He stared at her, his hand gripping the doorframe as if he wanted to slam it shut in her face. "You have exactly 5 minutes," he said, his voice a bitter rasp. "And then you leave, and you never come back." Elena stepped inside, her heart breaking at the sight of him. The apartment was half-packed, the life they had briefly shared here dismantled and put into cardboard boxes. "I came to offer you a way out," Elena said, her voice shaking. Marco laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "There is no way out. Elena, we discussed this. I leave tonight, or I die here. Those are the options. There is a third option," she said, stepping closer. "I spoke to the task force." Marco's eyes flashed with sudden, dangerous anger. "You did what?" "I told them I could bring you in," Elena said quickly, raising her hands before he could cut her off. "Not in handcuffs. Marco, as a collaborator, if you give them the Valdez leadership, if you help them stop this war, they will put you in witness protection. They will give you a new life." He stared at her, incredulity warring with rage. "You sold me out to the feds again? You think I would rat? You think I would become everything I despise? I think you want to live," Elena cried out. "I think you are tired of the blood. I think you meant it when you said you imagined a life where you woke up as a normal man." She closed the distance between them, ignoring the warning tension in his shoulders. "I told them everything, Marco. I told them about Noah. I told them I was the leak. I put myself on the line because I cannot watch you die." Marco looked away, his jaw working. "You betrayed me, Elena. You broke my heart. I betrayed you for love." She shouted, tears spilling over. "I was trying to save my brother. I was trying to save you. I failed. Marco, I know I failed, but that does not mean I stopped loving you. It just means I was trying to hold up the sky with my bare hands, and it crushed me." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the ghosts of everything they had lost. Marco turned his head slowly to look at her. The anger in his eyes was fading, replaced by a profound, crushing sorrow. He reached out, his hand moving slowly, as if he were underwater. His fingers brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his touch light and trembling. "You have a talent for breaking me open," he whispered. He let his hand rest against her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "If I agree to this," he said softly, "if I walk into that room with the feds, it will not be for them. It will not be for redemption." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I will do it for you, Elena, because even now—" "God help me, even now, I cannot deny you anything." A sob tore from Elena's throat. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Marco's arms slid around her waist, pulling her against him with a desperate, crushing strength. They kissed. It was not gentle. It was fierce and trembling, a collision of grief and craving. It tasted of salt and desperation. Marco's hands clutched at the back of her shirt, anchoring her to him, while her fingers tangled in his hair. They clung to each other like two people standing on the deck of a sinking ship, knowing the water was rising, knowing this might be the last time they ever felt the warmth of another human being. When they broke apart, Marco looked at her, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "Tell them I am coming," he said. The meeting point was an old riverside park on the edge of the industrial district. It had been abandoned years ago, the concrete overlook cracked and overgrown with weeds. The playground equipment rusted into skeletal shapes. The weather had turned violent. A storm front had rolled in off the water, bringing with it a torrential downpour that turned the world into a gray smear. Elena stood on the concrete overlook, the rain soaking through her coat in seconds. She could feel the cold plastic of the wire taped to her chest, a constant reminder of the stakes. Somewhere in the darkness, Agent Miller and a tactical team were watching, their scopes trained on the clearing. She checked her watch. 10 o'clock. A pair of headlights cut through the rain. A black sedan rolled slowly into the lot and stopped. The doors opened. Marco stepped out. He was not alone, but he had not brought an army. Only 2 men were with him, his most trusted lieutenants. He had sent the rest of his crew away. He had dismantled his own protection to come here. He walked toward her through the rain, his hands visible and empty. He stopped 5 feet away, the water running down his face, plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "You came," Elena whispered, relief flooding her chest. "I told you I would," Marco said. He looked around the desolate park, his eyes scanning the shadows. "I assume we are not alone. They are here," Elena confirmed, raising her voice slightly for the benefit of the microphone taped to her skin. "They just want to talk. Marco? They want to end the Valdez threat." Marco nodded slowly. "Then let us talk." He took a step forward. And then, the world exploded. It did not come from the federal agents. It came from the tree line to the east. A burst of automatic gunfire tore through the air, shattering the windshield of Marco's car. One of his lieutenants went down instantly. "Ambush!" Marco screamed, diving toward Elena. He tackled her to the wet concrete just as bullets chewed up the ground where she had been standing. Federal agents erupted from their hiding spots, shouting orders, returning fire. But the attackers were not retreating. They were swarming the park from the flanks. "It is the Valdez crew!" Marco yelled over the roar of the rain and the gunfire. "They intercepted the comms. They knew we were here." Elena lay pressed against the cold ground, mud and water soaking her clothes. The air was filled with the deafening crack of rifles and the screams of men. It was pure chaos. The feds were engaging the Valdez gunmen, but there were too many of them. Marco scrambled to his knees, pulling a handgun from his waistband. He had not come entirely unarmed. He fired 2 shots toward a figure running through the rain, dropping him. "Stay down," he ordered Elena, shielding her body with his own. But the threat was not just in front of them. From the corner of her eye, Elena saw movement. A man in a dark hoodie had flanked their position. He was creeping up the side of the overlook, a shotgun raised, leveled directly at Marco's exposed back. Marco did not see him. He was focused on protecting Elena from the main line of fire. Time seemed to slow down. Elena saw the gunman's finger tighten on the trigger. She saw Marco's profile, fierce and determined, fighting a losing battle to keep her safe. She did not think. She did not weigh the morality. She moved on pure, terrified instinct. Elena lunged. She scrambled across the wet concrete, throwing herself at the gunman just as he fired. The shot went wide, blasting a chunk of concrete into dust. Elena crashed into the man's legs, knocking him off balance. He shouted, swinging the heavy barrel of the weapon down to strike her. They grappled in the mud. Slick with rain, Elena's hands found the cold steel of the gun, fighting to wrestle it away from him. He was stronger than her. He shoved her back, raising the weapon to aim at her chest. "No!" Elena screamed. She lunged again, grabbing the barrel and the trigger guard, in the violent struggle, with rain blinding them both. Her finger slipped over his on the trigger. She pulled, the gun roared, the recoil jarred her arm all the way to her shoulder. The man jerked backward, his chest exploding in a spray of red. He collapsed onto the wet pavement, his eyes wide and unseeing. Elena fell back, gasping for air. She looked at her hands. They were covered in hot, sticky blood. It mixed with the rain, dripping onto her clothes, staining her skin. She stared at the body. She had killed him. Elena Ward, who had spent her life trying to heal people, had just taken a life. Elena. Marco was there. He dropped to his knees beside her, grabbing her shoulders. He looked from the dead gunman to Elena's bloodied hands, his eyes widening in horror and awe. "You..." He breathed. "You saved me." The firefight around them was dying down. The federal tactical team, superior in training and equipment, had pushed the Valdez crew back. Sirens were wailing in the distance. "Reinforcements. We have the perimeter secured." a voice bellowed over a megaphone. "Drop your weapons! Everyone, down on the ground!" Marco did not get down. He stood up, pulling Elena with him. He ignored the red laser dots dancing on his chest. He ignored the agents screaming at him to freeze. He took Elena's trembling, blood-slicked hands in his own. He lifted them up, holding them between their bodies in the pouring rain. The water cascaded over their skin, washing the red away in pink swirls that fell to the earth. "Look at us," Marco rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "This is what your love has done. Elena, it has turned you into this. I had to—" Elena sobbed, her body shaking so hard she could barely stand. "He was going to kill you. I could not let him kill you." Marco looked at her, his expression shattering. He saw the horror in her eyes, the trauma that would haunt her forever. She had crossed the ultimate line for him. She had stained her soul to save his body. "I cannot hate you for this," he whispered. "God help me. I love you more for it." Agents were closing in. Weapons drawn. Moretti. "Drop the gun. Hands in the air." Elena gripped Marco's hands tighter. "Marco, please, do not let them shoot you. Choose a future. Choose a future that does not end in a body bag." Marco looked at the agents encircling them. Then he looked back at Elena. He saw the desperation in her face. He realized that if he fought, he would die, and she would watch it happen. After everything she had sacrificed, after the blood she had just spilled. He could not do that to her. He had to save her. And the only way to save her was to surrender. Marco took a deep breath. He released one of her hands and slowly, deliberately, raised both of his arms in the air. "Do not shoot," he shouted, his voice commanding even in defeat. "I am unarmed." He looked at Agent Miller, who was stepping forward with his gun leveled. "I will talk," Marco yelled over the rain. "I will give you everything, the Valdez crew. The operations, the routes, everything." Miller signaled his men to hold fire. "You are surrendering." "Moretti, I am trading," Marco roared. "I give you the syndicate. You give her immunity. She walks away. She is protected. That is the deal. Or I swear to God, I will force you to kill me right here." Miller hesitated, looking at the dead gunman, at Elena's shock-pale face, and finally at Marco's defiant stance. "Stand down," Miller ordered his team. "Get a medic for the girl. Secure the suspect." Two agents rushed forward, grabbing Marco's arms, pulling them behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the clearing. "Marco!" Elena cried out, reaching for him as paramedics wrapped a heavy blanket around her shoulders. Marco did not fight the agents. He let them lead him away toward the armored van. The rain was streaming down his face. Looking like tears, he refused to cry. He turned his head to look back at her. Across the distance, through the curtain of rain and the flashing blue and red lights, their eyes met. Marco stopped. He offered her a faint, sorrowful smile. A smile of a man who had lost his kingdom, but saved his heart. "I love you," he mouthed. Then the agents pushed him into the van. The heavy doors slammed shut with a finality that resonated in Elena's bones. Elena stood alone in the rain, clutching the blanket with hands that still felt stained. She watched the taillights of the van fade into the stormy night. She was alive. Noah was alive. The war would end. But the silence that followed was louder than any gunshot. She had betrayed him for love, and in doing so, she had destroyed their world. Their future was unresolved, a question mark hanging in the dark sky, bound by a love that had survived blood, rain, and ruin, but perhaps could not survive the morning. Thank you so much for listening to Mafia Boss Held Her Bloody Hands Under the Rain after finding out she betrayed him for love. I hope this story kept you on the edge of your seat. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please leave a comment below with your country or city. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster of loyalty, betrayal, and forbidden love, please make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel. Don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts on the ending in the comments. Did Elena make the right choice? I can't wait to read your opinions.